Moms for Liberty evaluated the Wit&Wisdom curriculum. This report is one in a series explaining our findings.
Children should learn about history, not be forced to relive the sins of the past. The lessons must be age-appropriate for young minds with no context. But the Wit&Wisdom curriculum takes 7-year-olds back in time to despicable acts of racial bigotry in 1960 and effectively abandons them there. It even directly tells teachers to point to and teach about the N-word in a famous painting. We vehemently object to that lesson, but it's one of many taught to second graders who read Ruby Bridges Goes to School, My True Story, and The Story of Ruby Bridges.
Ruby Bridges is a profile in courage. Her bravery changed the course of American history, and her story 100% should be taught, but at the right age and in a balanced way. These books and the manner in which the teachers are told to present the information are not age appropriate. Second graders lack the historical context with which to process and truly understand the story and how it fits into our larger American history.
Our objections also focus on Wit&Wisdom's relentlessly negative lesson plans in the teacher's manuals for these two books. Those we found most harmful include the repeated viewing of inflammatory images, which immerse children in the hatred of the past. Vocabulary lessons describing white people as mean, vicious, and angry. Weeks concentrating on the injustices of the past instead of civil rights progress.
I mean, when you think about a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, what they understand about the outside world is very, very limited. I mean, they still believe in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy. They know their family, they know their neighbors that they play with, and they know, the kids in their class. But to think about people, just groups of people being mean to each other and understanding the civil rights movement and just, they can't comprehend that.
Let's take a closer look at Ruby Bridges Goes to School, My True Story. It's by Ruby Bridges herself. She's the first black child to go to an all-white school in New Orleans, the year 1960. It shows historical photos of racism. We want white tenants in our white community. A smiling, all-American looking white boy holds a sign, "We won't go to school with Negroes." A restaurant with whites-only signs flanking the front door. There's Ruby being safely escorted to school by U.S. Marshals. As they pass angry crowds of whites, Ruby writes,
Some people did not want a black child to go to the white school. They stood near the school. They yelled at me to go away.
The words are hurtful, so are the photos.
Second graders are spending a lot of time observing a highly inflammatory historical photograph. The teachers are instructed to ask, what do you notice about these images? Pause to give extra time to notice the details of these photographs.
Here's what it says on page 8 of the Wit&Wisdom Teacher's Manual. Students will read these images as closely as they read the text. Page 189 of the manual asks, what is happening in the photo? Page 261 asks, what is happening in each illustration?
So they really want the children to see the hatred in these photographs.
These two books have a total of 51 pages. The teacher's manual for them has at least 24 instructions on analyzing disturbing historical images, photographs of racism, illustrations of hatred, a painting of a racial slur. This goes on for weeks in the second grade.
Our second graders who know next to nothing about American history, who could be easily manipulated and influenced, are deliberately being tasked with doing a very lengthy, in-depth analysis of specific instances of hatred that has happened in the past.
The book Ruby Bridges Goes to School, My True Story contains disturbing photos from the 1960s, but it also includes an iconic image from the civil rights movement. It's Norman Rockwell's painting of Ruby going to school, escorted by U.S. Marshals. This is the original color painting. Notice the N-word at the top. The slur is more prominent when seen in color. The slur is muted in the black and white photo in the Ruby Bridges book. A casual reader might miss it, but the teacher's manual highlights it for students.
The teacher's manual instructs the teacher to teach the N-word to second graders, and they are to discuss how words can be used to attack and disrespect people.
Page 7 of the Wit&Wisdom Teacher's Manual states, use this opportunity to remind students that racial slurs are words people use to show disrespect and hatred towards people of different races. Point out that the use of this word was common at the time. So the teacher's manual highlights the slur in the painting. It goes on to say, people still use this word today as a hateful slur. Reinforce the power of language and how words can cause pain.
I personally do not teach my child the N-word or any other foul language. I know that my child at some point, as she grows up, she'll probably hear these words, but the last place that I would expect my child to learn about the N-word is from her second grade teacher.
The second book that students read is titled The Story of Ruby Bridges. No photos in this book, but it's a beautifully illustrated depiction of the ugliness of racism. Here's a key passage.
On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside the Franz Elementary School. The people carried signs that said they didn't want black children in a white school. People called Ruby names. Some wanted to hurt her. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed toward her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. The marshals were frightened.
The imagery is unmistakable, and then there's just no redemption in this book. It deposits the child squarely in 1960.
But children don't just read the book, they analyze it for days, focusing on Ruby's emotional suffering. Let's take a look at page 229 of the Wit&Wisdom Teacher's Manual. The assignment, write a first-person narrative of Ruby's experience.
Ruby Bridges endured an immense amount of distress and encountered a lot of hatred in this story. And after the second graders read it and analyze it for days, they have to write a first-person narrative from Ruby Bridges' point of view. And this is inflicting her feelings of distress onto our 7 and 8-year-old children.
Teacher's Manual, page 275. The assignment, role play a scene from the book.
Ruby Bridges suffered a traumatic experience at the hands of true racists in 1960. No one disputes that. But why make 7-year-olds relive that experience by forcing them to role play it today? What does that accomplish? Only to make them feel bad or angry or victimized? Is that the point?
Worse yet, the role-playing exercise makes a mockery of what Ruby endured on a daily basis. Page 405 of the Teacher's Manual. The assignment, mock interviews.
They conduct mock interviews, pretending to be Ruby Bridges. And they made it very clear beforehand that the white people wanted to hurt her and kill her. And the second graders are then tasked with imagining Ruby Bridges' thoughts at the time, which was a traumatic experience. And they're also tasked with expressing her feelings. Every single day, they focus only on the past injustice inflicted by white people. There's no point in the book where they speak of white people in a positive light. And this is a book that they spend weeks on.
Students are also subjected to anti-white themes with Wit&Wisdom's grammar and vocabulary studies. A lesson on adjectives and adverbs keeps the focus on the negative. The Teacher's Manual instructs the teacher to post the following sentence. A mob stood outside the school yelling at Ruby. The sentence is a reference to this photo in the book. Tell students that a big crowd of people that wants to be violent is called a mob. The assignment, adjectives.
The children are tasked with brainstorming adjectives to describe the white people. The examples that are given are angry, scary, mean, loud.
Back to the manual, page 190. The 4 words are angry, scary, mean, loud. The theme continues in another grammar lesson on adjectives and adverbs. Teacher's Manual, page 204. It's about the angry crowd outside Ruby's school.
In a lesson on adjectives and adverbs, To describe white people again, the teachers are instructed to use the word vicious and rudely during a sentence expansion lesson.
Teacher's Manual, page 205. They yelled rudely at me to go away. On the same page, the vicious mob yelled at her to go away.
It's all of these really negative words. Those are the words that they focus on.
There's more focus on the negative in a lesson plan on prefixes. Teacher's Manual, page 11. The focus is on 4 words: injustice, inequality, unequal, unfair.
The lesson on prefixes. They use injustice, unequal, inequality, unfair. Out of all the words in the world that have prefixes, why did they choose those 4?
It's just negative, 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 all the way through every single lesson, day after day, after week after week. It's just, it's awful.
The Wit and Wisdom lesson plans built around these books are not age appropriate.
This isn't a college level course on injustice. This is a 2nd grade English language arts program. They're robbing our 7 and 8-year-old children of their innocence by having them spend 2.5 months every single day writing, talking, and reading about hatred, imagining and exploring the thoughts and feelings of hatred, and looking at historical photographs of hatred.
Hatred in the words, photos, paintings, and illustrations, and repeated focus on injustice. These 2 books are part of 9 weeks of study of the civil rights movement. The teacher's manual for that is 478 pages long. It mentions injustice 314 times.
It's almost as if they had designed this to make innocent white children of today feel guilty for other people's sins and mistakes of the past. Those who coincidentally just happened to share the same skin color as them, when they had nothing to do with what happened 6 decades ago.
Congress outlawed discrimination more than a half century ago, but that's not the message in Wit and Wisdom's lesson plans.
The teacher's manual specifically states that the teacher needs to emphasize that the struggle for equal rights continues to this day.
You'll find the quote on page 9 of the teacher's manual. The struggle for equal rights continues to this day, and that's the message to 2nd graders.
They're under the impression that we're still oppressing people of color today, that white people are still being oppressors. It is a very heavily biased agenda here.
As far as these kids know, it's still happening. They might believe that there are fountains, drinking fountains that are segregated. They might believe that people are kicked out of restaurants. They might believe that people are getting hosed down by the fire department somewhere in the world, because it's never clarified that all of the progress that has been made since 1964.
They're not teaching them that the present time is different.
As far as these kids know, that's still the way it is out there in the big world that they aren't exposed to yet because they're 7.
As we've seen, the Wit and Wisdom Teacher's Manual focuses on injustice, not America's political, legal, and social triumphs over racial and ethnic bigotry.
They are teaching a skewed view of history. They are keeping the good parts of American history from them on purpose. They are focusing only on the bad parts repeatedly. This is not education. This is anti-American indoctrination.
In summary, Moms for Liberty believes these books, but in particular the Wit and Wisdom curriculum structured around them, are not suitable for the 2nd grade. Ruby Bridges' story is memorialized in her own book, but is there a lesson for young children? In an interview, she offered this.
I always say to people that it would be really, really hard to explain to a 6-year-old child what I was about to encounter going to school that day.
Ruby Bridges herself has stated she did not comprehend what was happening to her in 1960. Her innocent child mind equated the crowds of people to a Mardi Gras celebration because that's what she was accustomed to living in New Orleans.
As we said at the beginning, Ruby Bridges is a profile in courage. Her story should be taught, but at the right age and in a balanced way.